Welcome to The Space, a virtual show that focuses on Africa's contributions to knowledge. I have been fortunate to have met and even worked with so many amazing people of African descent, composers of African operas and art music, visual artists, museum curators, creators of experiential media and virtual productions, choreographers, musicians, art collectors, and cultural specialists who succinctly explain Africa's contributions to knowledge. Join me once a month at the space to learn more about how the African spirit is preserved in the arts. Register on Eventbrite to be one of our virtual audience. See you at the space, a place for me and you on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. Welcome to the space. I am your host, Joyce Adewumi. When you hear the word opera, automatically your mind goes to Western European music. Some of my favorites are Carmen by George Bizet, Don Giovanni by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Aida by Giuseppe Verdi, and Puccini's Madame Butterfly, just to name a few. But when I mention, for example, Shaka by Akinyuba or Odyssey of a Dream by Bode Omojola, very few people can say that they know what I'm talking about. African opera or even African art music are terms that very few people have heard. But today, we are fortunate to have as our guest Bode Omojola, a Nigerian composer and ethnomusicologist. Bode Omojola is five college professor of music and chair, Department of Music, Mount Holyoke College. As a five college professor, he teaches at all the institutions of the five college consortium: Amherst, Hampshire, Smith Colleges, and the University of Massachusetts Amherst. A composer and ethnomusicologist, Omojola received his PhD from the University of Leicester, England. His research centers on Yoruba and African diaspora music, including modern African art music. His awards have included the Redcliffe Fellowship in Musicology at Harvard and the Alexander van Humboldt Fellowship at the University of Cologne, Germany. His opera, Odyssey of a Dream, was premiered in 2018 by the Mount Holyoke Symphony Orchestra and five college African opera students in the United States. Professor Omojola, welcome to the space. I've just read your bio and I know that I left out a lot of information. Please tell us more about yourself because this is probably the first time that some people will be hearing about an African composer who studied music formally. People are more conversant with popular musicians. Yes?
Yes, thank you very much, Joyce Adewumi, for that rather generous introduction. Thank you so much. And I think you have covered the main elements of my biography. But yes, indeed, I studied music formally. I went for my bachelor's degree at a prestigious Nigerian university, University of Nigeria in Kuta, followed by an MA at the University of Ibadan, and then followed by a PhD at Leicester University, where I studied musicology and ethnomusicology kind of combined. And then I went back to Nigeria to teach at the University of Ilorin for many years, but then came to the United States in 2004 for that fellowship at Harvard that you mentioned. Um, and then I got this. I taught briefly also at Northeastern University in Boston before coming to the five colleges. So yeah, so that's and I've been here at the five colleges since 2006, and yeah, it's been a nice place to be in. So once again, thank you for the introduction.
You're very welcome. Now let's see. How and why did you decide to study music?
So that's a question I've had so many times from people. Um, I think the first thing to say is that I was very fortunate to have gone to another prestigious high school. We call it secondary school in Nigeria, which is Christ School Adwikiti, which is one of the most prestigious schools in Africa. Music was not on the curriculum, but we had facilities. We had pianos, we had organs, and I was fortunate to meet some students who had been playing the piano even before coming to Christ School. And somehow I was introduced to the rudiments of music. And then when it was time for me to go to the university, I decided that it was going to be music. I have to thank my parents because typically you find that parents don't want their kids to study music. You know, do you want to be a Sonny Ade or a fella? That kind of.
Exactly.
Although, I mean, look at the prestige that both Sonny Ade and fella have. You know, but my parents were unique in the sense that they supported me. And so that was a big help from them. So I had no problem whatsoever in proceeding to study music. So I have to publicly thank my parents for support.
That's great. That's great. So you went to school, you studied music, you're a composer and ethnomusicologist. How do these two aspects of your work influence one another?
So I have to start by saying that in Africa, uh, those who study music don't have the luxury of saying, I studied history, so I'm not going to do any other thing. Or I did composition, so I'm not going to do any other thing. That is not the kind of luxury that we could afford in Nigeria. So typically you find people combining things. And we have a model in two key African scholar musicians, Kwabena Nketia of Ghana and Akin of Nigeria, both of blessed memories. And they combined the two aspects, being scholars, ethnomusicologists, and also being composers. So here is the deal. Um, the art of composition is not limited to creative thinking. Composition is a product of intellectual academic meditation. Uh, Composition is intellectually grounded, it is culturally grounded. So there's no way you can compose without doing some research. And that's where ethnomusicology comes in. Ethnomusicology, which is the study of music and culture, is the tool through which people gain a much deeper insights about their cultures. So, and what you then do is to apply the ethnographic knowledge that you gain in the course of research to the process of composition. It may interest you that Akiuba has actually theorized that relationship between ethnomusicology and composition with his phrase creative ethnomusicology or creative musicology, which is to explain and analyze the ways in which the art of ethnomusicological research becomes a vital tool to the compositional process.
Okay. So the ethnomusicology study results in the composer composing a work that we refer to as African art music, yes?
Yes, yes.
And what is African art music for our viewers?
Oh, another question. Um, there is a sense in which I have alluded to the notion of an African art. That phrase has gained significant prominence in describing the works of modern African composers, those who were trained within a predominantly European uh, pedagogy and who are now trying to free themselves
Mm,
from that impact of colonial rule. Because the music that we studied in school usually was drawn from the European canonical tradition, the Beethoven, the Brahms, the Bach. And so the very title African art music is a means to owning classical music, to indigenizing African music, to making it relevant to the African experience. So what such composers are doing could be described as part of a decolonizing process. How to decolonize composition and make it relevant to the African experience. But it's not an easy thing to do. It's a challenging process. Remember that as products of colonial rule, or those who have relationship with countries that were formerly colonized, we embody that very problem we're trying to solve, right? The way that we think, the language that we speak, the way that we have been brought up has been significantly Europeanized. So to now fight against your very identity, to do things that undermine that identity that you don't like, that colonially generated identity, it's not always easy. So that's why there have been so many experiments, so many products, so many different kinds of what I call compositional solutions
mm,
to that problem.
mm.
So I want to see African art music as a process rather than something that is already made. So the very notion of an African art music is
Mm.
seen in terms of a kind of a historical continuum, something that is happening, that is trying to define itself.
Okay. So, in that body of work referred to as African art music, what type of music do you yourself compose?
Um, I would say that it's been modestly varied. I have written vocal music, both solo songs, oral compositions. I have written for the piano. I'm fascinated with the piano. I used to be a fairly good pianist, even though my piano playing, I would say, has declined significantly because
All
of.
of us.
um, so I have written work for the piano. Again, that those works are influenced by another concept by Akiba, which he describes as African pianism. So I have written what I call experimental pieces for the piano.
Okay.
I have written a couple of orchestra works, and I have also recently been writing opera. So these are the works that I have been working on.
Okay. Thank you so much. So, when studying voice or opera in college, the literature, I mean, today we're talking about opera. So, when you're studying voice or opera in college, the literature is in German, Latin, French, English, so forth and so on. But no African opera is included in the study. But interesting enough, at Mount Holyoke College and the five colleges, I hear that you have something called the African Opera Series. I love this because African operas can be used as a tool to teach, preserve, and share African culture beliefs, language, history, music, and traditions with the world. So let's hear what one of your students have to say about this experience.
I have done operas before, but they've all been Western operas. So to work on an African opera, that's just completely different. I love the emphasis on rhythm, and I love the emphasis on free movement.
The whole idea is to provide something for students to experience African music by performing the music themselves and by working with master musicians and master choreographers who are the best in this particular tradition from Africa.
Okay. Now, tell us about this opera series at Mount Holyoke that your students are so in love with.
Yeah, so the series is actually tied to one of my classes. I decided to start teaching a course titled African Opera in Theory and Practice, whereby we spend the first half of the semester talking about history, talking about culture, talking about history, and trying to understand the core element of the African performance tradition. And then in the remaining half of the semester, we do actually go on stage. We go to the campus theater and do production. And that's why when it gets really exciting and students, we see them warm up this production part of the class. And it's rather capital intensive, and I usually have to raise funding within the 5 colleges. So I do the opera series something like once every 3 years.
Hmm.
Um, the actual time for a new opera is about now, but I don't think we will be able to do anything because of COVID-19. So that's basically the African opera series in the 5 colleges.
So, what are some of the operas that you've written?
So the first of opera that we did here is The Palm Wine Drinkard by Kola Ogumola, which is based on a novel by Amos Tutuola. So that wasn't my opera. That was just an opera that we produced. But after that, I decided to create an opera. I use that word create deliberately because it's a kind of orally derived opera, what you would call a typical folk opera, uh, based on the Queen Morimi story. Um, but then the last one that we did some 2 years ago, I decided to push the envelope and actually use the European Symphony Orchestra
Hmm.
to accompany the opera. And I was very fortunate to have an excellent colleague, Tian, who agreed to make the Maholic Orchestra perform the opera. That's where it really gets interesting. So it's basically kind of Western instrumentation, although I did bring in some traditional Nigerian instruments. So you could call it a kind of intercultural orchestra.
Okay. Well, we've been talking about African opera, your opera. Let's focus on one of your operas for now. The opera is titled Odyssey of a Dream, also known as Iriajo. Let's take a look at this clip before we go further.
The opera we're doing is called Odyssey of a Dream.
If there are two keywords to describe the performance process, those will be diversity and collaboration. The students who are on stage Most of them had never performed with an orchestra before. Members of the orchestra, many of them had never performed African music before.
You're working with people who have never performed African music before. And how does Iria Joe relate to Odyssey of a Dream?
Thank you very much. So in this opera, as I said before, this one is based on the life of a Nigerian immigrant who uh, comes to the United States and who is trying to survive, who faces many challenges, who has to navigate very difficult cultural, social, and political terrains, and who fought many battles. So that is the story of that Nigerian immigrant, whose name is, by the way, Coyote. And of course, the American dream is about how you are able to overcome the challenges of life, to become comfortable, to own a home, to raise a family, uh, to be happy, to be successful, to achieve your goals, your professional goals. And when you look back, it's a kind of a journey, isn't it? So I link the notion of the American dream to this philosophical Yoruba statement about Inriajo, which is the journey of life. So it's about battles, it's about victories, it's about challenges, it's about successes. So I kind of link those two concepts together, between the philosophical element of Inriajo and the social happiness that living the American dream signifies.
I like that. I know that you could have used one of our folk tales, but you are now bringing into our homes the experiences that Africans have when they come to this country, some of the experiences anyway. So let's talk about the music.
So this is it's very interesting because I think I will start by stating the, shall I say it, three key principles that helped me to link musical structure to dramaturgy. Because an opera, it's about linking those two things. The first one is about the character, the musical personality of the main character, uh,
Mhm.
Coyote, a Nigerian who grew up in Nigeria, who's familiar with traditional music, who has a good knowledge of popular music, who even has some interest in Western classical music. So I make him a multi-musical personality, somebody with multiple musical voices. So Kade is versatile. He sings songs that are close to traditional Nigerian songs, those that evoke or brand high life music, and those that venture into the realm of classical music. So linking characterization uh, to musical style. That's one. Secondly, I think about how music responds to the social, cultural, political spaces that each of the dramatic scene represents. So, for example, when the scenes are located in Nigeria, you hear a lot of traditional music. When Coyote arrives in the United States, he sings a song that he thinks represents the African American gospel tradition. Remember, these are his own perceptions now.
Mhm.
It's possible for an African American to say, well, that's not sounding too much like, that Coyote's subject position about American musical tradition. The third one is particularly significant because, and this is what I call the overarching goal of the opera, the search for an African operatic voice. what is an African opera? I didn't want to write a European opera, Italian opera, German opera. I wanted to write an African opera. Um, of course, when we hear the word opera, we are always thinking about Europe, Western cultures, aren't we? But there is something inherently operatic about African music, especially when you reduce opera to its basic elements, right? Musical storytelling, songs, instrumental, vocal, dance, and dramatic action. Those are the basic elements of an opera. And those are the very same things that define a typical African opera. But I was also not interested in writing pre-colonial opera because we don't live in the pre-colonial era. This is a different period. So how does one therefore create an operatic form that reflects the African modern cosmopolitanism, um, but also does not venture too much into the realm of Western classical music? Um, I'm not trying to reject Western elements, no, because let's face it, there's something we could do about that. We're both now speaking in English language, not my Ekiti language from Ekiti. I know you speak a little bit of Ekiti, but I won't test you.
Yes.
I'll give you your exam after this recording. Um, but so I then created this opera that has a relatively kind of an eclectic stylistic orientation in which I use the element of minimalism. So you hear a lot of repetitive elements. These are politically generated musical elements. I'm trying to create an African opera. So take this opera again as part of that art music process, that part of the trying to define African and art music. Um, so you see different stylistic elements, high life, traditional elements, modern choral pieces, but these are often not mutually exclusive. They do overlap, interact, engage, converse, as is the case of a folk song, a popular Nigerian folk song that I use in the music, whereby what I want to refer to as a symphonic reinterpretation of a folk song, and that piece is Egekashora.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I definitely understand what you're saying. As a singer myself of African operas, they need to, because so many elements are now in the opera, it's no longer traditional. So even the way you have to sing the song, it's not going to be the way it's performed in the village because you've got the orchestra now. You've got to be able to project your voice in a particular way, and there are techniques that you need to use that will change the way that you would sing it, differently from person who's in the village. But anyway, let's take a look.
This is so sad. I am devastated.
simply amazing. I really must thank you for the work that you're doing here. So tell us, what makes this an opera? That's a question that someone has asked. What makes this an opera?
Yeah. So first of all, of course, all the basic elements of an opera are there. There is a storyline that is being rendered musically. You have dance, which we wouldn't see today in this interview. You have dramatic action that help to enhance the effectiveness of the delivery of the storyline. You have a musical performance that is exploring different aspects of sound, including the melodic, recitative, even speech. So you have kind of, using the resources of sound in a way that will enhance the delivery of the storyline. So those are the basic elements of an opera. Of course, there are different types of opera. You have those that will not even use speech at all, and those that would. So one of the things that I also wanted to say about this opera is some of the melodies that I used in this opera actually date back to my unilearning days, where I was also writing opera for my students. Actually, my interest in the opera derives significantly from my work in a department of performing arts where you have dance, drama, and music. And so when I was writing this opera, I recalled some of those melodic material, reharmonize them and orchestrate them. Um, so what I'm trying to do by linking the unilearning experience to the five college experience is that the interest of my students is also at the core of this music. I was also trying to write a piece of music that they would enjoy. Some of my students are music students, many are not music students. And so I was thinking about them. You don't want to alienate your performers in the very process of performing your music. So I had to create a composition that I know they would enjoy very much. So all this allied to what I said before about the search for an African operatic voice combined to define the specific identity of this opera.
Thank you so much. We will take questions from the floor. If you have any questions, feel free to type it in the chat. I should have said that earlier. In the chat, we do see many of your fans. If I may, I'm going to read some of them out. One of them are writing in the chat. They say, "Great to see a product of Nigeria University and ATAS." I guess you know what that is. I think you attended in Suka, didn't you? Did you? Nigeria?
You
Did
mean
you attend?
you mean
Uh,
myself?
yes. Did you attend UNN?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think that's what they're referring to.
Omojola without Unsuka.
With the I think in Suka you had also the experiences of various operas also that the traditional operas that Mickey Zewi I think was putting together. Um, I
We,
came long after you guys, so I'm trying to remember.
yeah, making the way, but even more significantly from my own perspective, because I, I was living when Mickey came in. But
Okay.
Michiku Undubuisi is one fantastic composer that has influenced me significantly, both in terms of the very interesting opera we did, for example, The Vengeance of the Lizards,
Okay.
which is a folk opera, but also in terms of style. There is Undubuisi's musical scores are kind of folk inspired. There's a sense in which you glean the nuances of Igbo harmonies. at times wrapped within jazz harmonic vocabulary. So there's a sense in which I was influenced by his musical style. Of course, in addition to the fact that he provided the opportunity for me to experience an opera. I was a pianist for some of the operas that he did. Yes, Nsuka is at the very core of my musical personality.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for increasing the students' awareness of aspects of a culture that is different from theirs. I believe the more we open ourselves to learn about other cultures, the more we realize that our fear of other races is unfounded and we really don't know everything. Perhaps other colleges can learn from Mount Holyoke and include the study of African music in their curriculum. Let's take a look at one of your performers had to say about this experience.
We want to learn more about these parts of the world that aren't being talked about in a traditional music history class.
Students who aren't from West Africa or who haven't really learned much about West Africa really appreciate the culture a lot more and understand it more now that it's being put into practice.
Excellent. I remember when I did some work with the New York University, and a lot of the Black students were so happy to have. I think we did a musical that was based on Liza Strata. It's been such a long time ago, but they were so happy to have something that included them. That because a lot of African Americans were not getting enough roles in the production in operas. So I think that African operas is a way to not only give African Americans the opportunity to perform more, but also for everyone to come together and learn about African culture and the music. So I want to thank you for all that you are doing regarding this. And I have a question to ask you. Another question is this. As you know, the space is about showcasing the people of African descent's contributions to knowledge. Oftentimes, we don't blow our own horn or we are not recognized for the contributions that we've made. So the space is dedicated to showcasing this and bringing on people who have actually made some contributions. But in your own words, I would like to ask you, what would you say is your contribution to knowledge and how are you keeping the African spirit alive?
Sure. Just to note that there are three questions in the chat box that we could return to later.
Mhm.
But I think there are three ways in which I will describe my contribution to keeping the African spirit alive. Uh, First of all, is through teaching. I teach African music, both traditional and contemporary aspects of it. And this is one major way through which I have been able to help keep the knowledge of African music alive. I also compose music that interprets traditional music within new performance practices. Um, and then my research work as well, which kind of explores the core and the changing elements of traditional music and making them available to people through publication. So I would say that keeping the African music alive is my contribution to keeping the African spirit alive.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Kadupe Shofola. Occasionally, we allow people's face to show and ask them if they want to ask the question by themselves. So if I pick on you, get ready. But Kadupe Shofola says, she asks, how were the Europeans made to learn the Yoruba language within the short time of an half of a semester? Oh, I guess you're talking about your students. Okay.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. But let me tell you a secret. When you write melodies that follow the tonal contour of the language, anyone who sings that melody will sound Yoruba to you because you have already taken care of that. So once and most of my melodies, not all of them, tend to reflect the contour of speech. So when they sing that song, it sounds as if they even speak the language very well. But we do have scenes within the opera where they have to speak Yoruba words. So what I did was to record such words, sentences, and put it on the course website. And every day they'll go there and listen and try to say it as many times as possible. And once you're dealing with students that are very committed, there is nothing you cannot achieve. They did it with a lot of excitement, and they were not perfect in speaking Yoruba words during the production, but they did a great job in terms of their ability to cover most of the things they needed to do.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. So, African related, I'm going to allow you to ask your question.
Hey, hello. Thank you so much, Ambassador Domi, for doing this wonderful job. And thank you to your guest as well, Professor Dr. Bode Omojola, sorry. Thank you for just highlighting what we are as a people. It makes us so proud to as Nigerians and also as Africans to see our culture being interpreted by us telling our stories. And I guess for us at the core of Africa Related, that's what we do. So it's great to see. My question to you is how opera, it's so difficult to see someone dealing with opera as an African, but how is this received in Nigeria? I have spent a long time in Nigeria, and I know that it's difficult for artists like Ranti Mohin and but for places like the Muson Center that encourage at least artists to build their musicality. How do you see the reception and in Nigeria? And do you think it's going to change, and what would change it?
Thank you so much, and thank you for your kind words. Well, I left Nigeria many years ago. Although I do visit fairly regularly, I tend to think that maybe I don't have enough insight into discussing what's been going on, and that's why I'm usually very quiet on WhatsApp platforms. But from what I could glean, I think there is a lot of great work going on in Nigeria on the various campuses. At Muson, I know, for example, they have orchestras. There are some private orchestras in Lagos. This was one of the things that when I started the Musicological Society of Nigeria, which today is known as ANIM, the Association of Nigerian Musicologists, this was one of the reasons I formed that association. We were talking about having a national orchestra in Nigeria, but it was so difficult. So the way that I'm responding to your question is that there are a lot of private initiatives that are trying to sensitize people to promote art music, to promote operatic music. And there has been a lot of a development on the various campuses, especially in terms of indigenizing African art music. So I think that those two kind of different trends going on should eventually help to accord greater visibility to the practice of art music, including operatic performances in Nigeria.
Okay. We're going to go now to Doris Oswago. Doris, you may ask your question.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I actually enjoyed the opera I just saw. Thank you so much, sir, for doing this. Thank you for promoting the arts, music, culture in Africa at large. So I would like to know, sir, if tonal inflections are actually first considered when composing songs for your operas, and also if they're actually fixed to the music, or you compose the music after the words have been resolved or something. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. That's a great question. That's a great question. So it's a mixture of both. Those who are familiar with my work know my attitude to that. First of all, yes, following the tonal inflections of language is important. It's very significant because you're trying to make the words meaningful. You're trying to ensure that there's parity between musical contour and linguistic contour. Remember, this was a major problem in the colonial church when they were translating those hymns into indigenous languages. You know, we've heard a lot about that. But I must also say that I do not want to make language be tyrannical to my musical creativity. It gets to a point where I free my melodies from the constraints of language, especially when I feel that I have made that point. I have, you have heard this music, you have seen how this word should be pronounced, you know what I'm talking about, edro means wait. And so even later in the music, when I engage in some polyphonic weaving of musical material, and I see there is a need to kind of undermine language a little bit, I do that. And what I do is also ethnographically supported. I have listened to many examples of Yoruba music, and in some instances, the melody does not always follow the language. It does predominantly. So the short answer is, in like 60–70% of the situation, linguistic contour is reflected melodically. But in some other parts of the music, I free musical motion from the constraints of linguistic contour. I'm trying to remember the second part of your question. Yes, the point you made about which comes first, music or text. It's a dialectical relationship. It's not unidirectional. It's dialectical. You're moving back and forth between the inherent musicality of speech, which could be both tonal or rhythmic, but also you also look at the inherent momentum in the music. So I go back and forth and trying to balance both. I hope I answered your question.
Okay. All right. We're going now to Kayode Samuel. Kayode Samuel, you may ask your question.
All right, thank you very much. I want to salute and appreciate my mentor, Professor Omojola. Thank you for that beautiful session I've been having with you. My question really borders on how we could improve or get copies, access to materials that are being produced, particularly compositions by African composers who are in the diaspora. I'm sure you will agree with me that that's one of the major problems impeding learning of even Africa here, inability to actually of works that have been done. I don't know what you can do, particularly with regards to your own, if we start with your own compositions or productions. How do we access that in Nigerian institutions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kayode, for that good question. Kayode is my paddy, and we were together in Ilorin, and it's one of those people that, like other ones, that I've seen here, who have grown to become great scholars and practitioners of music. Yes, you raise a critical issue in terms of making scores available for performance, and I think that publication is one area that we have to address, especially now that we could do digital publications and just share links with people. I'm doing something in that regard, but I think many more people should also do that, so that we can make these copies available digitally, and so that people can perform. There's no point writing music that no one is performing. And one of the things that I've discovered recently is that you have to be an advocate for your compositions. If you're an African composer, nobody is going to come and say, where is your, just like what Kayode is doing now is rare. People don't come to you to ask for your compositions if you're an African composer. But if they're available in a way that they could be easily accessed, I think that should work. I could make I could make a copy of this opera available. I know, for example, that Ilorin under Taye Adeola his students performed this piece, I think about a year ago. So I could make the scores available, but I do agree with that critical issue of making scores available for performance and study.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to Manny. Manny has a question, very interesting question. Manny, please unmute yourself so you can ask your question.
Good evening, Mr. Omojola.
Thank you.
Forgive me for the mispronunciation. My question is, what advice would you give to someone who wants to study African opera?
I have to think about how to answer that question. There, as Joyce mentioned at the beginning, places where you could, and I'm sure you're talking about professional study, performance and so on and so forth, rather than just taking a class like my students are doing. I think I will have to research that and get back to you through Joyce, which in itself is an answer, which is basically saying that it's not very easy, but also an answer that comes with a promise to research and explore the possibility of if there are places where you could do and study African opera.
Well, we will create it. Just like very soon we will start having African operas being performed here in New York. So watch out for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you all for your question. We'll take about 2 more questions. There is a link. There's a link in the chat for those who want to learn more about the operas that were presented today. Somebody's asking, Mbe Anthony is asking, I'll let you ask your question.
Good
now
evening,
we can hear
Good
you.
evening, Prof. All right.
Good evening.
Prof. I've really enjoyed the lecture, or everything we are seeing now. I consider it a lecture because my lecturer actually shared the link that we should join. So the question I'm asking is that the storyline, I want to really understand the context of the opera, the storyline of the opera. And then I saw 2 ladies behind the performer, the singer herself, dressed on white. So what were they really portraying? I want to understand the context and the concept of the whole of the whole opera so that we can really relate with them like on a personal term. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. So what I'm going to do now is to share a link with you.
We actually have shared it. Is the same link? We've shared the link of the videos of the operas.
No, it's a link that talks about the concept and the kind of questions that is asking, which yeah. So where is the chat? I hope everyone has access to the.
Yes.
So
So you click on it, chat.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the link. You can click on that and you will see a report. It's a very simple story. If you want your opera to be successful, you don't make the plot too complicated, because we did not do any translation or anything, so the audience were hearing those Yoruba words, but they could follow the story. It's basically exploring the theme of immigration, and as I said before, I was actually more interested in the kind of deep internal conversations that the immigrant is having with himself or with herself, as he, in this case, as he confronts the various challenges that he faces. Um, so it's a very simple story. There is no deep philosophical thing. It's just a political thing, an advocacy in for immigration. Now, the white robe, that's the Aladura Church, because one of the scenes in the opera is the Aladura Church. I hope you know about the Aladura Church. These are like Africanist churches that I think they're called Independent African Church, where people worship in a way that is more reminiscent of pre-Christian practices. And the white robe is what they wear. They talk about the white garment church. So one of the scenes is a white garment church, and people are still wearing that costume from that scene to participate in another scene, because there were practical issues of having to change the costume before they get to the next scene. So that's why you see those robes. They actually come from a different scene, the Aladura white garment church scene.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to answer all these questions. And I hope Professor Omojola has answered your questions well. I don't see any more questions. If you do have any question, you have 1 second or 2 seconds to put it up before. Okay, I see 2 hands. All right. So I will allow Adeolua Okunade to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Professor Omojola, and thank you, Joyce, for the good work. Let me quickly say that and start on that note. I want to ask this from Professor Omojola. You have talked of creative ethnomusicology or creative musicology. How do you handle your harmony if you are coming from that angle? Do you put European style of harmony on one side? Because if you talk of creative ethnomusicology, there are some culture in Africa too. That one of the things we talk in the classroom, there should not be hidden, no hidden octave, no parallel with all these things. How do we handle such when you're writing an African opera against the backdrop of creative ethnomusicology? Because if you come to my area in Ekiti, we hear them singing in seconds, and that may not be allowed in the Western theory class that all of us are talking about. So do we take that into consideration when we are writing our own African art opera? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Adeolu. Adeolu is another another guy, my very good friend. Look, there are no rules. Your music is your music. You were referring to what is often referred to as the common practice era. That it's the tonal eras of Baroque, classical, romantic, impressionism, and maybe early part of the 20th century. That's the common practice era, where you have to obey rules. But remember that even some of the composers of those era did not always obey those rules. I think the art of composition is a personal expression. Just express yourself. Whatever you find suitable for the music that you're writing. For example, Ekiti Seconds in this opera. There is an orchestral part of the opera that we are not playing today, where I harmonize in Ekiti, those major seconds, cadential seconds, which I call intentional harmonies, because the singers are doing a predominantly unisonal singing. They are singing in one part. Then at some moment within the music, they break into two and sing in major seconds. Remember, triadic harmonies does not have a space for major seconds, right? So secondal harmony is itself a statement, a political statement, saying that there are more harmonic practices than what are available or what are presented in common era European music elements. So there are those kind of harmony in this opera. In another song, that song is different from this other one. So it depends on what the kind of melodies you're writing. And as I said before, this opera has that dramaturgical component to reflect the personality of the main character, which therefore gives me the liberty to write music that is very diatonic. Many people may not know that some of Joshua Ozogwe's pieces are very diatonic. So he was writing for Ukum drum that we are all analyzing, but Ozogwe also wrote very do re mi fa sol la ti do kind of music. So it depends on what you're writing. There is that overarching goal to create an African voice, and all these different diverse stylistic elements could occur within that overarching goal. But that doesn't mean that you cannot borrow from Western practices. One thing that I want to say, when we talk of a Nigerian identity in music, remember that Nigeria is a product of colonial rule. There was no Nigeria before the colonial era. So the very identity of Nigeria is intercultural, it's European, it's African, it's everything layered together. That's why we're speaking English today. So when we're defining the African identity, it also has to be done in a progressive, dynamic way, in a way that is performative. In other words, in a way that responds to the atmosphere. So if you write a kind of hymnal thing, hymns have become the Nigerian tradition. We must also remember that. Um, so my short answer is yes. I think we should use those traditional resources that you mentioned, and we should continue to work towards realizing an Africanist voice in art music. But there are moments when certain what I call musical contingencies within a musical composition will call for some other harmonic practices that you may not easily locate within the pre-colonial uh, era in Africa. I hope I
Thank
answered the question.
I just want to add, because we do have other people who are listening, that just to clarify, you're talking about the concept of Nigeria. That is all the various ethnic groups that have come together, or that have been brought together to form that entity called Nigeria, did not exist, before the colonialists. That's what you're saying. However, all these groups that have been brought together have their own culture. They exist. As a matter of fact, as a matter of fact, African cosmology says that Ife was the place where the world started.
Yeah.
So way long there. So we've been there. We've been there. Also, I wanted to point out, when you talked about Joshua Uzigwe, I have to really, as many of you know, I worked with him for many years, perform a lot of his music, songs. It's from him that I got the concept of the African spirit because he kept talking about the need to maintain the African spirit in everything that we do as Africans. So, in order to have an authentic voice, if you are composing the music that's supposed to represent the Akiti people, I don't see why you won't have the seconds there because that is characteristic of Ekiti music, you know. So we have to understand that we have to be our authentic self in everything that we're doing, in our compositions, in our everything, because like a friend of mine says, be yourself, other people are taken. We have studied Western music, but studying it is just like tools which we can use, the language that we can use, but how we put those words together becomes something that's personal to us. So just wanted to put that out there. um
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
that was great. That was great.
All right. So let's see. Is there any? Okay, there is another person who wants to has their hand up. To know Ade or Oyewale. So I'm going to allow you to speak. Please unmute yourself.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Bode Omojola and Ambassador Joyce. Thank you very much. This day has been so impactful as far as I'm concerned. I'm grateful to have this session with you. Thank you very much. My question as a young composer is, when writing an African opera, I don't want to streamline it to only opera, but let me just say African music in general, will it be out of place to dive solely into the African um, harmonic material instead of making use of the Western style of accompaniment? Will you be out of place, sir? Thank you, sir.
So these are very complex questions, depending on your different perspectives. I think that if the attempt is to write an African opera, I think we should dive into traditional elements. But when I say that, I then add a caution that music is not static. Cultures are not static. When you look at some of the compositions by Joshua Uzegwe, our hero, he uses atonal procedures, Western-derived atonal procedures, combined with the exploration of the nuances of the horizontal and vertical dimensions of Igbo instrumental music. So what makes Uzegwe is not just the traditional one, it is also the modern one. Because remember, when you are composing, you're also expressing yourself. It's an expression of your identity. And that identity is different from the pre-colonial identity. That's the point that I'm making. I am not my father. My father's musical taste is different from my own musical taste. So it's difficult to completely remove yourself from your work. You are who you are. You're expressing yourself. You're expressing your identity. And that identity is not my father's identity of 80 years ago. So yes, you could dive into traditional elements and use them. You could also use Western elements. Remember, you're writing for the piano, so that's Western to start with. But you can use, so what I'm trying to say is, and I used this word before, performative approach to composition. In other words, you are using old materials in new ways. You look at some traditional elements and then you reinterpret them within the context of your experience. That African identity will resonate in it because you have used traditional elements. You've also expressed yourself, and you are African in spite of the contradictions that define you based on the impact of colonial rule and its after effect on you as a person. So my answer is yes and no. Dive into traditional music, but also feel free to integrate what is reflective of your own experience, which may include the European influences as well.
Okay. Um, just want to chime in a little bit. I'm loving the conversation. Um, let's go back and talk about Akuba's African pianism and also the way Joshua Ozigwe used the piano. I mean, he studied the mba drums, the traditional drums, and he used a Western instrument the way a traditionalist Nigerian traditional musician would use the drum, the whole ensemble of the drum, and that's what he did, transform that. So for me, I would say because of the movement that's going on in the US right now, the movement is that of embracing one's identity and dismantling racist policies, which made us believe that we were less than the white people,
Mm.
the racist policies, which they came to. I mean, I have to let you all know this is what's happening here now. It's a dismantling of white supremacists, because the real reality is that the people who came to Africa were racist. They were racist because they felt two things. Either Africans were too stupid, or they had to be uh, socialized to be able to learn the Western way, which will then make them smart, or civilized. So we need to free ourselves from those racist um, thinking, those racist thoughts, and free ourselves and understand and have the confidence to embrace what is ours, embrace what our ancestors used to do, but do it in a different way. Yes, we know we're not them, but we can keep our spirit alive, the African spirit alive, even through Western medium.
Exactly,
But we
exactly.
can keep it alive. And so that's what this whole thing is about. I am paying homage to those people who have helped to keep the African spirit alive, because we are not European. We have our own culture. We have our own musical language. But yes, we can use these modern equipments, modern instruments, in a different way. In which case, you will now have this new music that we're talking about, African art music.
Exactly. I totally agree with your comments, Joyce. I totally agree.
Okay, I think we need a school, right? Well, I want to thank you very much, Professor Omojola. We have come to the end of our program. Thank you to our viewers for joining us. We do have a treat for you. Thank you, Professor Bode Omojola, for sharing your music, your wisdom, and knowledge with us. We really appreciate it. The
You're,
space is presented. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just say you're welcome.
The space is presented on the last Saturday of every month at 5 p.m. New York time, and that will be 10 p.m. Nigerian time. For more information, please check us out at www.thespaceseries.com. We'll come your way again on April 24th at 5 p.m. as we discuss African wisdom and heritage preserved as artworks and home decorations. Once again, we thank you for joining us at The Space, a place for me and you on Facebook and Zoom. I want to give a huge thanks to our technical director, Malika Harris, and the whole production team. I saw somebody in the chat said, Malika, thank you. They saw you in the movie. And So thank you for that. This program is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. Additional support provided by Fund for the City of New York, Howard Gilman Foundation, New York Community Trust, the Mosaic Network, and WQXR FM is our media partner. Listen to WQSR, New York's own only classical music radio station, live now at 105.9 FM and WQXR.org. And sign up for the WQXR e-newsletter for weekly highlights, links to web streams, on-demand concerts, videos, events from the green space, and more. And remember, your generous contributions allow us to continue to bring such programming to you. You can make your donations on our website at www.thespaceseries.com. So for your viewing pleasure, we will close with an excerpt from Iriajo, a piece titled Sahara Wind Finale.
Bless my soul, the ring of praise, coming from